Hi, everyone. This is Marc Prioleau, and welcome to this session from Overture Maps. Last week, as some of you maybe know, we had a release, and we uh, called that a general availability release. And one of the things we wanted to do is get some time to with some of the key engineers from Overture to walk through what that was, and some of what's in there, and more importantly, get a chance for people to ask questions. And so that's one of our big goals. We've got a few slides to show to run through some of what's there, but we really hope to get it finished. We have an hour allocated, but we really hope to get it finished in time for a pretty robust question and answer period. So with that, we've got a Q&A function operating there, and if someone wants to ask a question, you can put it in there. It will come, and you can, I think, upvote it in some way, and so you can take a look at it. And as we get through the presentation, we'll try and answer those questions. I see there's a raised hand. It would be like a lot easier for us in there to answer questions or in the Q&A. And also there is a chat there that won't be seen by everyone, but if you're having problems technically, please put a question in there. One of the things I did just want to introduce the folks who are here. My name is Marc Prioleau. I'm the executive director of Overture. Amy Rose, the technical director, is here, and Amy leads a lot of the technical aspects of the group, and she's going to walk through what was in the G&A release. Pascal Clarysse from TomTom is there. Pascal is one of the lead engineers, especially on the transportation, but also across the project. And Jennings Anderson, who's a software engineer at Meta and has been involved all the way along on Overture. And he's going to talk about the Global Entity Reference System, or GERS, which we think is a really important part of what Overture is doing. So we want to spend a little bit of time on that. So again, we're going to go through it fairly quickly, and hopefully have time for questions as we go. I'm not, if anyone is having trouble hearing or anything like that, please again make comments in the chat. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A. And I just want to remind people the Q&A questions will be anonymous, so we won't see who's asking them, so you can use that to your advantage. And I also just want to make sure people know that this is being recorded and will be available later on. So with that, let's just jump in. Here's our agenda. I'm not going to give a detailed overview of what Overture is doing. If you have more questions, ask them. I'm going to turn it over to Amy, who's going to discuss what went out last week in the general availability release. Pascal is going to talk a little bit about the transportation layer. Notably, we put a number of our themes into general availability. Transportation is not, and so he's going to walk through a little bit of what the path looks for that to general availability. And then Jennings will talk briefly about what GERS is and how it's used and how we see it being used as a way to sort of extend the work that Overture is doing. And then Q&A, and again, that's anyone who wants to ask questions on whatever topic, whether it was something we covered today or whatever you want to know about Overture, please put them in there and we'll try and get to them. So let's jump in. Nora, if you want to go to the next slide. So really quickly, Overture, if you haven't seen it, and I assume most of you have, but Overture is a project with the mission of building high quality open map data sets. And one of the things that we look at a lot is aiming our outputs to the people who use the maps. And the vision we have is that those maps are built best by the people who rely on them, because we can tap into not just the best sources of open data, but also the feedback and the signals that come back from those users. And so that's the vision. The idea is to put together a collaboration of companies that are using maps, and that those companies kind of set the direction and the tone for what we're doing. And then the products we release are open data. They are released as open data. Anyone can use them. You don't need to be a member to use them. And they're released under open data licenses. So they're quite unrestricted. And our goal there, honestly, is to set these as baselines that really everyone can use. That's really the goal. And by doing that, we hope that we can really accelerate what happens in mapping and really make room for some of the more advanced mapping that's coming on down the road. If we go to the next slide, what that turns out in principle is really kind of three things. And the first one is we want to use all available sources of maps. One of the things, obviously, in building map data, there are many, many sources. And the same is true in open data. There are many sources for open data, crowdsourced. We rely heavily on OpenStreetMap, great project. We use that quite a bit. There are also government sources of data. There are business sources of open data that we use, for instance, the Microsoft and Google buildings that are AI generated. And increasingly, we see other sources. And our view there is that the best maps come from the best use of all sources. So one is to be able to use data from many different sources, conflate it, and put it together. And you'll see that in some of our initial products that we've put out. The second thing is to work on the quality and validation, and part of that is conflation and deduplication, but also increasingly we're looking at how to do validation on the data using a variety of means, and so we're working on that. And then the third thing that we think is quite important is to be able to put that data out in a organized schema, a documented schema for people who are using it. Nor, if you could give me one more click there. For people who are using it, we want to have the data in a published schema that's stable, that designers and developers can anticipate and build with. And then the other part, and Jennings will talk more about this, is give people a way to link their own data or other data to those base layers. And that data can be open data, it can be proprietary data, it can be private or secret data, but there needs to be a way to unambiguously link to the entities and the features in the map data. And that's something we call the Global Entity Reference System. We think that's going to be a really important part of what we're doing. Jennings will spend a little bit of time on that as we go. And then my last slide is just to show you, we started this in December 2022 with 4 founding companies, and it's since grown to a community of over 30 companies. There are a few not on this slide that we just haven't gotten permission to. They're fairly new, and we haven't added them yet because we're waiting for them to make an announcement. But it's grown to be a really good community. And I think one of the things that we really appreciate is that if you think about this community, it really represents a variety of use cases, and maps are used in all kinds of different things. And we have people here who are interested in transportation modes. We have people who are interested in spatial analytics. We have people who are interested in social media and AR, and it just goes. And I think the broader the coalition can be, the broader our perspective is, and the better map we build. So we're very excited about the coalition. I would just make a note that the work of Overture is done by member engineers. We've got a couple of them here, Jennings and Pascal, but there's a much bigger community of engineers that are working on these projects and really doing the work. And so that's really the key to how this works. So with that, let me turn it over to Amy, and we'll go through what was in the general availability release. Amy?
Thanks, Mark. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you can make it and join us today. So as Mark mentioned, last week we put out the first general availability release for several of our themes, so base, buildings, divisions, and places. And so what do we mean by general availability? I think above all, what we're signaling is that we've reached a stable state, stable point in our data and our schema development, where users can start to incorporate Overture datasets into their workflows. So that being said, if you haven't already done that, I want to encourage everybody to use the data and give us feedback on the data so that we can be continuously improving. So this is a place right now where We've marked schema version 1 in this release, and we have GERS implemented with a changelog for each release going forward. So we hope that this should make it a little more straightforward to incorporate this into your workflows. But above all, we really do want to hear your feedback and know what are the things that we can improve on going forward as we work through both improving and maturing these data sets that are already in general availability, but also as we work on new themes and move some of our other existing themes into general availability. So aside from schema reaching version 1 and having a GERS changelog and just that basic stability that we wanted to reach, there are also a couple of new and notables with this release. First, I hope you've noticed that we launched the first version of the address theme. So it's an alpha release, and it includes address data for 14 countries. That's about 200 million address records. And if you're wondering why we picked the countries that we did, what they represented was these were countries that offered national level data sets. They had permissive open data licenses that were compatible with each other. And they also represented a cross-section of addresses from around the world. That last point's pretty important because anybody who's worked with addresses before, and especially trying to organize them into a standard schema, understands the challenges of creating a schema that will accommodate just the enormous variety of addressing formats that are used around the world and for different purposes. So we have a long way to go. Obviously, this is the alpha release. But our goal with this initial release is to give users a starting point. And that starting point, I hope you'll use as a way to provide us feedback, particularly on the schema and how it works for your use cases, ways that we could potentially improve it. Because we do want to build the right tools and processes to get addresses to general availability in the coming months. So aside from just the addresses being in alpha, I do want to call out the good work that openaddresses.io has done. We could not have built this as in such a simplified way if it weren't for the work that they had done and being able to build on that. So I just wanted to call out that the process to continue to build the address database. I hope that we will continue to build on the work that they are doing. So if you do have address data and you do want to include it as part of an open data set, I would encourage everybody to go there because that is a vehicle that Overture will continue to use going forward to build out our addresses data set. I'll skip a little ahead here and talk quickly about some of the tooling. So you'll see some ongoing development of open source tooling continually happening in Overture, like the Python command line tool that was published a few months ago. Coincident with the July release, we also published an experimental PySpark app for splitting Overture transportation segments. And this was put out there really to offer an alternative way to consume the Overture transportation features. So some users might find this helpful. It is experimental, it's still in development, but it is something that I think, depending on what your use case is, could help some folks actually use the data and consume the data in an easier way. We also, for the first time, are publishing Overture data in PM tile format. We were hearing from developers that having Overture data immediately available as tiles would save some steps, make the data more straightforward to consume for map applications. So this is something now going forward that we plan to make part of all of our releases. And you can check out both the PM tiles and the transportation splitter repos in Overture Maps on GitHub, and the link is down in the lower corner. So now talking about something I think, even internally we're pretty excited about. One of the things with data is having an easy way to just look at the data. What is it? Without having to go through querying or downloading, just being able to quick access. What does the data look like? What is in Overture Maps? Is this useful for my use case? Provide feedback. So with this release, you'll see for the first time the Overture Explore site. And if you go to the next slide, it's a quick, not even really a demo, just a visualization of what that is and how that works. And I hope that everybody's already had a chance to take it for a spin, but again, this is just a really easy way to look at the data. It's not meant to be, cartographically pretty. It's really more of an X-ray look into the data, but really to get all the data, all the attributes as a way to just poke around, see what it's like, see what's there, see what's not there, and ideally, again, providing feedback. If you'll see in the upper right corner, there's a little icon, a bug. So as we continue development over the coming months, we definitely want to hear from you. If there's questions you have about the data, if you'd like to report an issue with the data quality or a glitch in the website, just click on that icon and it'll redirect you to file an issue in GitHub. And I encourage everybody to do that. We definitely want to hear what could be better. So next slide. So what it's not. General availability does not mean we're finished by any means. Anybody who's worked with map data knows that just the nature of the world continuing to change means that the map is never finished. So we are going to continue to improve both the data and the schema, but also continue where it makes sense to add new themes, continue to improve from alpha addresses and beta transportation to get those to general availability. But I hope that what everybody has noticed as I've been talking is my persistent message of we want your feedback. That's the great thing about an open project is what we want to be able to do is be responsive to the things that the user community is telling us. So part of that is getting feedback from the users, and part of that is recognizing the feedback that we've already gotten and finding ways to improve on what we haven't done great yet. So coming soon, we're going to be focusing on ways to help everybody use the data a little bit better. And this is based on feedback that we've already gotten. So one of the ways that we want to do this is to provide more information about any changes or new features that users can expect in future releases. Just so everybody can anticipate what's coming, when it's coming, and be able to prepare for those things. For example, we're working on a schema versioning plan right now. The idea there is that we understand as we were getting to version 1 that we were making a lot of changes to the schema. And so every month there was new features in the schema. And what we want to be able to do is announce those before they're happening, if they're major changes or breaking changes, and allow all the users to plan for those schema changes and incorporate what that might look like in their workflows. I hope you also have noticed that we've made some new additions to documentation. I know when Overture first launched, documentation was thinner. Now we spent a lot of time both reorganizing and building out the content and the documentation. So hopefully that's been very helpful to users. One thing in specific that we have been working on is theme-specific user guides. And so those guides describe feature types in more detail. They provide specific information on data access and retrieval, usage guidelines, data analysis and visualization. And in fact, just this morning, we published the first iteration of the Places user guide. So you can check that out on our documentation page. We've also reached a point, particularly since the schema has reached version 1, where we can put more of our attention on evaluating additional data sets to integrate into our Overture Maps theme. So all of the themes have been looking at that, but I know we are going to be digging into that more explicitly now as we kind of move past this initial general availability launch. And finally, Marc mentioned, and I think you've probably noticed that transportation was released still in beta. And so I'm going to turn it over to Pascal now and let him talk about why that is and what the path to GA is for transportation.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Yeah, so we had the ambition to be part of GA, of course, but when we had within the team discussed the situation, we identify these 5 big things that actually prevent us from being in beta. And I want to give you a little bit color on these things and why we made that decision. So first of all, what we have identified is the fact that we do have connectors. So connectors are the locations where segments come together, but they're not splitting each other. So it's the segmentation is not there at that locations. And what we have learned is that for certain situations, it's not always that straightforward to calculate the position of that connector. So self-intersecting ways and so on makes this a little bit difficult. Also, we got feedback that a lot of people are actually doing this calculation. So we identify that for making connectors really useful, we need to add the linear referencing, which is indicating the position of that connector so that nobody needs to calculate it and can just use it out of the box. So that's for the missing LR. Then on segmentation. So segmentation is something is a big thing, of course, in transportation. We made a proposal, at least in the beta release now, we have a segmentation logic, which has 2 big components. One is that we don't segment for attribute changes. So if attribute is changing, we're doing that by referencing or by using linear referencing to indicate that this is a change in attribution. The second thing is the concept of major and minor road, where we only segment major roads and minor roads are actually not used for segmentation. They're part of the release, but they're not used for segmentation. What we have learned by consuming the data ourselves, as well as feedback from others consuming, is that this segmentation logic, although being very powerful for ID stability, it is not as useful as it can be, because a lot of people want to use this transportation to put it in the routing engine, and actually requires segmentation or splits on all of those connector locations. So we're debating between making a release where we segment everywhere on all the connectors, or actually delivering a software which is called the splitter tool, which allows people to decide themselves where they want to split. Because we know that although some use cases want to split on those locations and other use cases want to split on those locations, if you will be splitting up front, it means that everything is split. It will reduce ID stability and actually forcing everybody to comply, or actually to absorb that upfront decided segmentation. So you will see in the path to GA is that this splitter tool is going to be published, and we're going to see if that is actually going to resolve this challenge. The third part is on the missing subclasses. So we typically introduce classes that are more or less one-to-one with the highway types of OSM. We've seen that this is mainly accurate and sufficient, but there are a couple of classes like in pedestrian and in path where the attribute is actually indicating a bit more sophisticated, or a bit more indication about what exactly this way is representing. So in pedestrian, there's a difference between a crosswalk and not. And so there was a discussion about, should we extend the class range and as such increase the segmentation, or should we introduce subclasses and keep the segmentation as is? So that's upcoming and will be available for feedback. Then the fourth one is about lanes. So we identified early on that lanes is something that is very important for transportation, and we defined it as part of the schema, but we don't have data. And that doesn't feel right, that we would present schema without data, because then we could not validate if the schema actually would work. So there we need to make a decision. Should we remove it from the schema? Should we add data, do something else? But yeah, it was not in a state to actually release it. And then the last point, which is related to the ID stability. Like I said, this GERS ID stability is very important for anybody who wants to reference this base layer. We have been monitoring our ID stability, and it's looking good. But the period of our monitoring is still limited. It's only a couple of months that we're monitoring, and we want to monitor it for longer time to see if the trend is still there and is valid and acceptable. So that was another reason why we're not yet in GA. If you again move to the next slide, Nora. So what are we going to do? So what is our path to GA? So first of all, we're going to introduce this linear reference for connectors. It should be available somewhere in Q4 of this year. We published already the splitter tool. So this will allow anybody to take the transportation beta data and push it to the splitter tool, allow you to configure where you want to split and where you don't want to split. The subclasses that we discussed will be part of the August release. And we will be sending around a request for comment document in August to collect feedback on the other points that where there are other discussions point, so that we know how to tackle them, or that we have feedback how to have feedback and input to see if we how we should tackle those existing problems. And of course, as time will go on, we will be able to monitor the ID stability. Which brings me to the importance of GERS, and I think Jennings will talk a little bit more about that.
All right, excellent. Thank you all. Okay, let's dive into the Global Entity Reference System, or GERS, as we come to affectionately call it. Nora, next slide, please. Excellent. So I wanted to show, here's a screenshot from the Explore page that Amy was talking about earlier. And what we've highlighted here, I've clicked on a specific building, the Washington State Ferries Terminal, and you'll see in the inspector panel, a bunch of properties have come up about this building. And if we look at here, it says theme buildings, type building, subtype transportation, and then we see the ID here. GERS IDs are 128 bits, represented as 32 character hex string. And what we've done with GERS is make them unique across all of the Overture features, and within themes as well. So we have this intent to create stable IDs across all of the themes that are currently offered on buildings, divisions, places, and transportation. And the idea here being that with each release of Overture, we're going to make significant effort to keep these IDs stable, being the same ID on the same feature, release over release. And so you can expect that this Washington State Ferries Terminal will have this consistent ID in every release into the future. I also wanted to highlight here these kind of other properties that are attached to this specific building. You'll see that it says sources OpenStreetMap and USGS LiDAR. And that's because we've taken USGS LiDAR height, matched it to this building via the GERS ID, and we've assigned this height of 15.8 meters onto this ferry terminal. So this is one example of just the power of GERS. We've done this internally, and now we're providing this one feature that has this GERS ID and this height all in the same schema. But this is an example of how we would hope that other data sets could also reference their data to Overture as a stable base and identify the GERS ID that Overture has assigned and associate that ID with their particular data. And so as Marc kind of mentioned earlier, this is a perfect use case for proprietary data and folks looking to sell data or match data. You can kind of use this GERS ID as this interoperable identification where now we're doing column joins and not spatial joins when we're trying to combine different data sets. So currently Overture is offering these stable IDs on our buildings themes, divisions, places, and then transportation. As Pascal said, that's still in beta and moving forward. And so stability so far is looking really good in how we're evaluating this so far. We will have more reports as more releases come out on exactly stability per theme as we do this matching. And we are also releasing now a GERS changelog per release. And so this allows us to track, this is a new feature, we haven't seen this GERS ID before, or we know this is the same building, but maybe some or building or place, but maybe some attributes have changed and the underlying data has changed. And we can document exactly what those changes are by looking at that persistent ID. So we do think this is one of the most exciting parts of Overture, being able to create this specific identifiers for every feature on kind of the Overture base map, and then really be able to build and associate data onto Overture moving forward. So yeah, with that kind of general description of GERS, I think it'd be great to switch into the Q&A, and we can dive into some more details.
Great, thanks all. And we almost hit our time exactly. We wanted to leave a good amount of time for Q&A, and there are a lot of questions and answers in there. I'm going sort of by upvote, and some of the folks will try and address some of the questions just in the Q&A if we think we can do that. But we'll try and go through. The first one, actually, Yuri, thanks for asking this question. I'll read it. The question is, would it be possible to organize these as non-anonymous community meetings so that Overture community can get to know each other and collaborate more openly? It's a great question, and actually a very timely question. I think to date, a lot of our work in Overture has been the members working together, trying to come up with things. And when we do things and put them out, we do ask for comment on GitHub. But I think we're getting to a phase now where we will have people using the data. And one of the things we mentioned is a number of people are already using the data in various ways. And so I think we're now at a point where, as an Overture, we're thinking about a user community, a group of people who are using the data, and we'd love to hear from them. And also we want to make sure that they're hearing from us and getting feedback. And so I think that is a community that we're talking about now, how to organize that and optimize that and build it. So totally get the reason for the question, but I think we're in a new phase. Incidentally, you know, one of the other things, as Jennings said, you also envision a community of people who aren't necessarily using the base data, but are associating their data with GERS IDs so it can be used by people using the base data. And I think that's another community that we see developing. So more to come on there. And yeah, I think totally will be in that way. Let's see what happened here. Sorry, I'm all of a sudden I lost a message here that I was going to do next, and I'm not sure why. Hold on. Let's see. I'll take. Sorry, I have a little bit of confusion on the ordering here, but let me take this one next and maybe give it to Amy. It says, "Will Overture enhance update the postal layer?" I assume by postal layer you mean what we call addresses in a forthcoming release. Amy, do you want to answer that quickly?
Sure. Yeah. So yes, if we're referring to addresses, yes, that's going to be continually changing and probably in large ways. I mean, we'll be adding more and more country coverage. That's where we'll start, is if we have national level data sets that we can draw on. Then, you know, again, looking at the criteria of more permissive open licenses. When we're talking about the schema, I think that's where the enhancements are going to be most apparent. We put out kind of this basic schema to capture something that could be a reasonable structure for a variety of different address formats. And so what we would like to do in terms of enhancements going forward is make sure that that works for use cases. So the way that the addresses are structured, as we build out new countries and add those into our data set, I anticipate that that schema is where you'll see a lot of the changes aside from just new data being added. So as you're seeing those changes, and if there's things that you know, say this really doesn't work, or yes, this is a great way to do it, or if you have suggestions for, you know, improvements to how we're structuring that, would definitely encourage you to go to our GitHub repos, and there's a docs repo, there's a open data repo, and then there's a schema repo. And if you have specific feedback that you want to give us, I think that would be a great start for us.
Great. Jennings, I'm going to send this one to you because you've been very involved with the buildings data set, but the question is, what decides when to use OSM, Microsoft, or Google, and I would add also Esri Community Maps for any one building in the building data set?
Absolutely. That's a great question. We currently have a fixed order of conflation right now, and it takes OpenStreetMap as top kind of priority and kind of order or set of kind of ground truth there. And then under that is Esri Community Maps data. And then under that, we have a mixture of Microsoft Open Buildings and Google Open Buildings that are extracted from AI. And so we've done this kind of when we do our buildings conflation, it's just kind of based on that precedence. And then there are some confidence values associated with the AI derived data, and that kind of helps determine which of those buildings went out. But ultimately, OpenStreetMap and Esri Community Maps are at the top of the conflation order. And the reason we do that is it allows us to have this nice feedback loop where we do have, with OSM at the top, data that needs to be fixed, especially in our buildings layer is now 2.4 billion buildings. And using tools like Rapid, AI-derived building footprints can be inspected by a validator, any person, and then added into OpenStreetMap. And so if that happens to an AI building from, say, the Microsoft ML buildings data set, then it will be no longer becomes a Microsoft building, but now it's an OpenStreetMap building and it's been validated by a person. And in the next Overture release, we'll pull that building from OpenStreetMap, not from the ML data. And so then it will change and increase in priority. And you can also imagine a future there where you see something wrong on the map and it's coming from ML. When you go and fix that data inside of OpenStreetMap, then that will flow back in and kind of override that conflation. And so that's why we've picked that very specific order so that we can continually to improve the buildings layer while having this combination of our goal is to create the best, most accurate, most coverage layer of buildings globally. And so to do that, we're combining the best sources of open data, and that's what we see as the best ordering to do that. It's a great question.
Yep. Yeah, I think a good answer there, and maybe leads into, I'm going to group a bunch of several questions. There are a number of questions that are generally around the theme, and Amy, I'm going to maybe ask you to address this of how do individuals contribute data? If you see something and you look in the data, maybe using Explorer, and you say something's wrong, what is the best way for those contributions to make their way into the data?
Yeah, so there's a few things here, and I'll kind of cover it pretty broadly. So generally, contributions, the best, most straightforward way to contribute feedback is to go to our public GitHub repository. So I'll post the links in the chat here in a second, just to make sure everybody has them. But if you see something in the data, that's usually the best way to report that back to us, give us the information about it, help us understand whether it's an issue with something that we did in our processing or whether it goes back to the source. In terms of the source data, the ideal situation as we're aggregating data from a variety of sources is that any issues with the data that existed from the source feed are things that get fixed in the source. So for example, if we're pulling something from OSM that is part of our release, we would encourage users, if they spot an issue, to go fix that in OSM because there's an easy way to do that. There's other sources that may not be as straightforward. So as we start to incorporate data from, let's say, national mapping agencies, obviously they're going to be the ones that are responsible for making any changes to the data. One of the things that we've just started to put together and will be developing over the next several months is, as part of our validation, one of the things that we want to do is report some of those issues that we're finding as part of our bigger validation as the data goes through our pipeline. So anything from geometry issues to logical consistency, what we'd like to do is report the issue that we found, what the source is, and actually make that transparent back to the users so that if you are a data owner, or if you know somebody who's a data owner that wants to take a look at that and say, actually this isn't an issue because of this, or hey, this is great that this was spotted. Now we can go and adjust this. That's something that we'll be working on in the coming months. So in terms of data issues and data quality issues, those are kind of the two paths right now. Other contributions, aside from just feedback, if you've developed tooling or if you're using Overture data, and you've created some examples of what you're doing, we would love to hear from you. Reach out to us, and we'd love to include links to your tooling. We'd like to be able to include demonstrations of how you use the data on our community site. So I think that's a really great thing about it being an open project, is that we've already seen how the community has continued to develop things around the Overture data, or even developments of formats that we're using, like tools to work better with GeoParquet. And those are all important to kind of build this ecosystem, not just for Overture, but more broadly. So if you have examples of that, or if you want to contribute in that way, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I reiterate, I mean, especially on themes where OSM is a primary data source, fixing the data in OSM is a great way to get the data back to us. In other ways, and as Amy said, we are working on sort of what the feedback mechanisms and how that'll work. There were a number of questions, and maybe I'll take this one on what about our intent to use government open data? And government open data is a huge and growing source. And one of the main things we did want to be able to do is make use of government open data, where it's available and where we can bring it in and use it. The address theme that just came out is all open government data that we sourced. And as Amy said, we have 14 countries, and they were selected primarily because they had countrywide open data. But I think as we go through that, that is an area we would like to expand. And I think there are two ways to think about that. And one is there are in many cases government open data, which would be very helpful to put into the Overture base maps as part of the base layers of information. Addresses is a great case, but there are other areas as well, including administrative boundaries and maybe even road center lines and things like that, buildings even. In those cases, we'd like to integrate open government data into our data. There's also a lot of open government data that wouldn't necessarily go into the core themes, the base layers, but might be attached to that data via GERS. And we have a use case on our website that Esri did where they attach FEMA data in the US for emergency management to buildings. And that was an example of using a government data set and attaching it via GERS. So I think there are those two paths as we go. And that's one of the foundational things we wanted to do. The other part of it is we have been talking to to various government agencies. Right now, I think one of the things we're saying is that we are primarily, I think the way to think of Overture is as a distribution channel for that data. The governments build data, they put it under open licenses for a reason, that reason so it can be used and have impact. And I think being able to incorporate that data into a global open data set allows it to be used in the best way. So yeah, super interested in that, happy to go further on there. Let's see, we're doing okay on time. Let me go down here. I think we answered some of those. We answered the addresses. Here's a question. Let's see, we answered government data. Maybe, Amy, I'll give you this. Someone asked, could you speak to your strategy on quality assurance? Will you, well, we talked about user community feedback, but maybe more broadly talk about how we're thinking about quality assurance in the data.
Right. Yeah. So right now, and when Overture first launched, a lot of that quality assurance was already built into some of the processes that existed in our member companies. And so what we have done from the get-go is bring these forward as part of Overture, and we'll continue to do so. So as those things are being developed within our member companies, we'll want to take advantage of those the best that we can. But the other piece of that is that, you know, we don't necessarily want to do each of those in isolation for a particular theme. We want to make sure it's comprehensive. And so as we continue to build out our publishing pipeline, those validation steps are being incorporated in a consistent way across, you know, everything from when we bring a new source in as a data feed to once it gets to kind of a theme promotion state to also once we get to a release promotion. And the reason for that being is that we want to make sure that interactions between data, particularly as we're thinking about things like GERS and how GERS connects across our themes, we want to make sure that we're catching any issues that might come up with those cross-theme interactions. And so as I mentioned before, we're going to be building these out more in the next couple months. Right now, we certainly have a lot of validation that goes on specific to the OSM data as a source, and we'll continue to do that. But I think it's important to make sure that we have a consistent framework for any new data source that we have in, and not just that we are running this validation, but that users of the data understand what we're doing and what we're finding and being able to interact with those results as well. So, you know, we haven't necessarily decided on how that reflects in each release. So, you know, do we release everything and, you know, also an issue log, you know, a log of known issues, or do we think about, you know, a certain cutoff where certain issues aren't going to make it into the release? And I think there's going to be a mix of that. And if you have any feedback on which would be more useful, we'd love to hear that. We want to try to make sure that the data, whether it has issues or not, is something that people find most useful.
Great. I'm going to take a question here that Brian asked and maybe expand it and ask Jenny, sorry, I'm springing this on you to answer. I think Brian's question is, he was playing, I think, with the Explorer and clicking on something like a place or an address, but he didn't see the buildings. And I think what it gets to is many of these themes are obviously interrelated. Places sit in buildings and have addresses. How are we thinking about, could you, maybe Jennings or Amy, how are we thinking about linking between different themes, which I think is what Brian's asking there?
Yeah, exactly. And I also saw that, Brian. It looked like and with the Explore site, yes, you can click around. If you click on the actual building itself, you should see those building attributes pop up, and then you'll notice the dots there represent places or connectors in the transportation network or addresses. The idea with the Explore site is also to show, it's not a map so much as in kind of this X-ray view, which is to show all of the Overture data. But to get to Marc's point there, with something like GERS and having these IDs on all of our features, we obviously want to get to this point where you have a building, and then you're going to have an address associated with that building, and then you're going to have a place or many places inside of that building. And GERS is going to allow that linking actually between themes within Overture data. And so that is something to expect in the coming future. Having just introduced addresses, we are looking, and I know there was a question there about address coverage. I can kind of touch on that quickly here too, in that as we're with addresses coming out being brand new, we are looking to evaluate the schema and our approach to addresses, not necessarily the full coverage. And we want to test some of these things. And then as we kind of stabilize around this, then we'll really expand and go for coverage there. But there will be a future as addresses get to that point where we can start to associate addresses and places and buildings all interrelated. via this GERS ID, and we see that as being another big, powerful part of what Overture can provide. And then, of course, external data sets that are linking into those GERS IDs will then be able to kind of join that same topology and reference the building or the address as we get going.
Yeah. Thanks, Jennings. I'm going to take a question here from Dominic. I'll read the question and then I'm doing a little interpretation. Hopefully I get it correctly. It says, confidence is already an indicator, but this community validation made Google Maps so strong. And so it gets to the point of like community validation as a signal. You know, as I think we're because of the mention of confidence, I think we're talking about the places data set. And if people haven't looked at the places data set, each record has a confidence score, and that confidence score is important. If you've played with it, you know it's important because there's data in there that has low confidence scores that you probably don't want to display on a map. And I'll just say a couple things on that. One is we include those for a very specific reason, and because people, if you're displaying on a map, you probably want to skew to the very higher confidence scores before you put something on a map. But if you're doing local search, people who do local search want a broader range, including some very low confidence scores, because what they really don't want to do is return no results for a search. Because places is being used by a number of different use cases, that's one of the reasons we include those. But we will concede that if you take all those and drop them on a map, there are a lot of issues in there. The second point I think is really a great one, which is how do you validate? And places is, you know, as many people on this call know, places is a tough one, right? Because they go in and out of business. One of the things that we're looking at there, and we're in the pretty early stages, is so our approach on places is not necessarily to let single editors control whether a place exists or not. And we think there's a lot of room for malicious things to happen there if I could, for instance, edit my competitor's record. But we do think that we do have an opportunity because we do have a collaboration. If you think about all those logos on the slide, a lot of those companies interact with businesses on a pretty regular basis. And so the thing that we're working on and have run a little pilot on is to say, is there a way to get back from a subset of the community some indication that the place is still there? And that really is kind of the signal. And so if you think about that, what you would get is a number of different signals that would set not just individuals, hey, this place is still there, hey, it's not, but a range of different signals that might be for whether someone dropped someone off there, picked someone up there, delivered a package there, or something like that. And those combined signals could be aggregated into a more robust confidence score. And so that's kind of the direction that we're heading on that as we go. So totally get it, totally get the question. And that's sort of where we're going. While I'm talking, I'll just take one question I think I can answer quickly. It says, are you interested, do you have any plans to help promote projects which are building upon OSM data for social good? I mean, I guess the thing I would say is we are driven primarily by what our members want to do, and the data is there and the data can be used for any number of things. I do think there's an interesting thing if you think about the mapping assets that you need for, say, environmental or climate or any of those things. There are some different map features that you would want to highlight and emphasize and maybe attach data to. And that's really driven by our membership. If people join and become members, then those efforts will become prioritized. Humanitarian OpenStreetMap just joined. That's one that's in that category. But I think as more members grow from that category, our priorities will shift to that. Let's see. I'm going to pick this one and maybe ask Amy. Someone asked, reporting data in GitHub is not going to be very scalable. End users should be able to easily report an API would be helpful. Amy, do you want to take that?
Yes, you're right.
Quick, concise.
No, we've had a lot of conversations around this. One of the things right now is that's kind of the place that we have right now if you want to get feedback, but we are working on other ways to get feedback. So things like APIs or tooling that will make it, I would say, not just more scalable, but probably a little more user-friendly, especially if you're not necessarily, there's going to be a lot of users of the data that might not be as familiar with GitHub. So yes, that's in the works. We're working on that right now. We don't have something like that. So the only option really is GitHub.
By the way, I see a number of questions in here about the size of GERS, and I'm just looking at it. It looks like that's a question that will consume the rest of the time if we ask it. And maybe one of the things I'll suggest is Jennings, we can answer that offline in some way. I don't want to dodge the question, but I'm just reading the comments, and I think it will probably take the rest of the time if we answer that one as we go. Let me just see. Let me do this one. Actually, this is a good one. It was mentioned that PM tiles of each layer will be provided with each release in the future. When each layer is GA, are these considered sufficient to use as a full-fledged map? Does Overture plan to provide basic styles to make these PM tiles usable in Map Libre out of the box? Amy, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. Right
Or
now,
someone else?
we don't necessarily plan to develop styles, but that could be down the road if there's enough interest. Similarly to why we created the tiles in the first place. Really, we've talked about whether a similar interface to Explore that is actually a stylized cartographic map would be useful. And of course, with that would mean available styles. So. I think it depends on what the feedback is. There's a lot of organizations that already have their own styles and wouldn't necessarily benefit from that. Individual users would probably benefit more. So we've talked about it. I don't think we have any solid plans at this point, but it is a conversation. So again, if you have specific suggestions or use cases where that would be helpful, we already know of some, certainly, but yeah, just reach out to us.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've debated, we're a data project, and primarily we are doing data, and to some extent because it's open data, anyone can do that. It's not dependent on us, but we also recognize that we need to develop some tools to help people use it. And so that's one of the ongoing conversations we have, or what are the tools that we should develop versus what should we let the broader world develop. I'm going to answer one more question. I think we'll be at time. It says, do you have plans to integrate OSM data into the Places theme? And I just want to answer that because our Places data has a permissive open source license, which basically means people can use it with very few conditions. And I think the challenge for us with OSM data, bringing OSM data in, is if you bring any OSM data into the Places data set, then the entire data has to be released under a share-alike license, ODBL. And the problem we see for that is our Places data set right now is about 53 million places, which is a good start, but it's not all the places in the world, clearly. I mean, that number would be more like 200 million. And so what we expect is people will use our Places data with other Places data sets and conflate them until they get the fingerprint they want or the footprint they want. The problem is if our data set is ODBL, all the data sets they merge with also have to be ODBL. And I can talk about regional cuts and things like that, but the problem with an ODBL Places data set is it makes it very hard to conflate with other non-ODBL data sets to get full coverage. And so that is sort of our logic there on why that. Now, OSM can import our data into theirs. A permissive license can go into ODBL. We welcome them to do that. We're not going to bulk import it. I think the community is glad of that, but it is available to go in. But that's our rationale on that. We have several more questions, but my watch tells me we're at time. I want to respect that. Thanks, everyone. We'll try and sort through the questions and ones we didn't get to get back to you. But thanks very much and great questions, and hope to do more of these in the future.